Hi, I'm Darian.
And I'm Quinton.
And come on, just have a seat.
I already did.
Already did.
Sitting down.
Take a hot chocolate.
Coffee. Black.
This is He-Brews.
When you speak, dreams and reality collide. Your word rewrites my destiny. Love life finds a new beginning. You are my energy. Jesus, you're everything I need and more. I follow you till the end of my day. Jesus, you're everything I need and more. You are my energy.
I have something coming up this week that I want to ask for prayer for. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's personal, but I do have a lot of anxiety about it, and depending on the outcome of it, how I'm feeling and whatnot, I may or may not be here next Sunday. So just want to throw that out there. If you could just pray for me for this week. I also want to pray for the message. I'm doing it right here. I'm not doing a video for a couple different reasons. One, to switch it up, and two, because I cannot stand watching myself on camera. Last time we had a recorded message of me, I was cringing the entire time, and I didn't want to go through that again. So I'm sorry. So hopefully this comes out really smooth. I just want to pray that this right here goes well. It's a really good message. I'm so fired up for this message. I tell you what, the Holy Spirit just spewed it all out of me. I literally sat down on the computer. I wrote it in like 20 minutes.
So
Churches
Oh, it was so good. I couldn't get it on. I couldn't get it on there
So,
fast enough.
technically,
Also,
people do it.
but so we can have this message on the YouTube there. We are continuing our study in He-Brews. I do have coffee for the continued He-Brews. In He-Brews chapter 9, we're looking at the earthly tabernacle. He-Brews is a cool book because what it does, if you guys haven't noticed already through the continued studies that Darian's have, it's very Old Testament heavy, right? He-Brews is basically a study in looking at how the Old Testament points to the New Testament, points to Christ, right? And it's constantly taking things from the Old Testament and showing showing that all of human history, right, has been preparing us for Christ, which is really cool. So what we're going to be looking at is again chapter 9, and the first couple verses here describe what is called the tabernacle, right? And I'm going to read a little bit here. Now the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. This was called the holy place. This is also called the outer room. All right, you'll see that in a second. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered Ark of the Covenant. This was what was called the inner room. Blah, 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 blah. And then verse 5 says, but we cannot discuss these things in detail now. I just really want to, really quickly, let me know if you guys can see this or not. I got a little diagram here of what the actual tabernacle looked like, right? Fancy schmancy. What it is, it's actually a tent, right? I didn't know that. It's kind of weird, right? There's just a tent set up inside the temple, but everything's covered in gold for whatever reason, right? Because God wanted it to be special, right? So you got the outer room here, right? And it's kind of cut open so you can kind of see the curtains that are separating the rooms. So you have the outer room here, and in here you have the inner room, right? So this right here is called the most holy place. Going back to Hebrews, we're going to start here with verse 6. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room, again, so that's the holy place, to carry on their ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, the most holy place, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance. All right. When the Lord spoke to Moses in Exodus regarding the actual tabernacle, what he says, and it's in chapter 25 if you want to look it up, it says, then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. All right, so the most holy place was essentially where God could be reached by man, right? Where God could commune with man. So understand this, at that time, the Lord could only be reached in one place by one man, and even that only once a year, okay? And this day that the high priest could go in there was called the Day of Atonement. And this right here is regarded as the greatest day of the year for Israel. This ceremony is described in detail in Leviticus chapter 16. I'm going to be going to Leviticus 16 a lot. Okay, so if you guys want to do a side study, Leviticus 16. All right, verse 2 says, tell your brother Aaron. Aaron was the, I believe, the first high priest that there was. Okay, so tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. All right, so even the high priest, right? So the high priest, the guy who's kind of like leading them in their faith, he's forbidden from communing with God, except for this certain time. Even then, in Leviticus there, it goes on to describe that he has to wear certain sacred garments before he can enter. And then he had to be washed up, to be ceremonially clean. He had to go through all this whole ritual before he could even enter. And once he entered, the first thing he had to do was sacrifice a bull. Because this right here was the only thing that he was allowed to do once he got in there. He went in there to sacrifice. So the only person who was worthy enough to enter into the most holy place first had to sacrifice a bull, an animal, for his sins. Right? So just think about that really, if he wasn't worthy enough, if he had to make that offering first, who really would be? So he offered a bull for himself, and then he offered 2 goats. One was sacrificed on the altar to take away their sin, and the other was where we get the term scapegoat, and that other goat was allowed to live, but he was released into the wilderness. All right, verse 21 there in Leviticus says, he is to lay both hands on the head of the goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all of their sins, and put them on the goat's head. The goat will carry on itself all their sins. Right, so one goat takes away their sins, the other goat takes away their guilt of those sins. Right, does that make sense? And that's why this is called the greatest day of the year for Israel, because this was the one time a year that the high priest could make offerings and for himself and all the people of Israel. Everybody gets to have their sins covered. Right, verse 30 again in Leviticus says, because on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. This is a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year for all the sins of the Israelites. The Hebrew word for atone, right, the Day of Atonement, the Hebrew word for atone means to cover. So this process could not remove their sin. It could only cover them. This is why the ceremony had to take place every year. And individual offerings of sin for sin happened all throughout the year, right? So what does this show? It kind of shows that there's really no path to God yet. There's no path to God that's really been set up yet. Everything was temporary. The law had them in a cycle. You sin, you sacrifice an offering. That's a lot of dead goats. We're going to jump back to Hebrews. Verse 8 says, the Holy Spirit was showing by this that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed, as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning, right? So the way into the most holy place, again, the only place where we could commune with God, had not been disclosed, right? And we kind of know that already, right? One of the more famous verses of the New Testament, John chapter 14 says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, right? 1 Peter chapter 3 says, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the righteous, to bring you to God. Okay, going back to Hebrews 9, this is an illustration for the present time, indicating the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not yet able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. They were only a matter of food and drink, and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order, right? So we're talking about, the new order, right? What is that new order? And I don't know if you guys have noticed yet, but there's a lot of really, again, crazy symbolism and imagery and stuff that we're going to kind of get into here that really is just a parallel about this, right? So verse 11 in Hebrews says, but when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands, that is to say, not a part of this creation. All right, so stick with me here. I want to kind of break this down, kind of break it up into a couple different parts and really look at it. First, so Christ is our high priest. As Darian had taught, so he is our high priest, and he has gone through the tabernacle to make the offering, right? So he has entered into the most holy place, right, to make an offering, right? But the thing is he has no sin. Christ has no sin, so he doesn't need an offering for himself, right? And that's backed up. Verse 12, the very next line. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats or calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciousness from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God? There's an exclamation point there. That's why I said that. All right, so Christ continues to fulfill the law the Lord had laid out, right? So again, this isn't really replacing the Old Testament or the old religion. It's saying that this right here is continuing, right? This right here is the new order of it. All right, and it's to a greater extent, so there's no need to continually sacrifice offerings, right? We jump ahead to verse 25 in Hebrews. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that is not his own. He has appeared once for all for the culmination of all the ages to do away with the sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as there were two goats, right, originally, right, in the original ceremony, right, one sacrificed for the sins of the people and the other that lives to bear to the sins and the rebellion of the people, Christ fulfills this as well, right, because he sacrificed himself for the sins of the people, but then he rose again and he lived. And there he bears the sins of the people, but only this time he's going to be coming back, right? So verse 28 says, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him, right? Awesome. If we jump back to that part in verse 11, that last part, it says, the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands, that is to say, not part of this creation. In Exodus chapter 25, the Lord gives Moses instructions on how to build the tabernacle. Have you guys ever read any part like this? I was literally mad when I was reading this because it is in obnoxious detail. Like it's like, man, God, why can't you give us this much detail when you give us all of your other instructions? Like, literally, let me read. I'm just literally just going to pick a spot in here, and I'm just going to read this and listen to how this is set up. Make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen, and with cherubim woven into it by a skilled worker. Hang it with gold hooks on 4 posts of archaic
wood overlaid with gold and standing on 4 silver bases. Hang the curtain from the clasp. Place the Ark of the Covenant of Law behind the curtain. The curtain will separate the holy place from the most holy place. Put the atonement cover on the Ark.
You get it, right? I could, he's literally saying he wants this in specific detail down to the, right, every little piece he wants exactly how he's saying it, right? You can imagine Moses going, whoa, God, slow down, right? I'm chiseling this, right? How many cubics do you want this? I was reading this and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that we're spending this much time on how to make a curtain. The reason he did this was because this is where the Lord said, I will dwell among them, right? In this sanctuary, right? I said that verse before, build a sanctuary for me and I will dwell among them. So this is where the Lord wanted to be, right? But the Lord set that up on purpose. So what is this, again, in verse 11, he says that there's going to be a greater and more perfect tabernacle, right? How could it be more perfect, right, than that, right? Because he was given incredibly specific instructions and everything like that. So what is this greater and more perfect tabernacle? It's us. After Jesus is crucified on the cross, he said that it is finished. He goes, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split. From the most holy place that people weren't allowed to enter, right, was split. So that symbolized that God was no longer accessible through just this room in the temple. In 2 Chronicles, chapter 2, Solomon, when he was rebuilding the temple, right, and he was building it to its... When he was building it to his glory, he says, but who was able to build a temple for him, since the heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain him, right? So God doesn't want to be cooped up in this one little room, right, and talking to us through an intermediary once a year, right? John chapter 14 says, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. On that day you will realize that I am in my Father and you are in me, and I pray for you. And I am in you. My Father will love them. He will come to them and make our home with them. All right? So his home is going to be with you. In Revelation chapter 3, here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice, open the door. I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. All right? So we are his tabernacle, all right? Our hearts, right, are his most holy place, where he wants to dwell among us, right? I mean, you guys have probably all heard that. I mean, that's such a cliche, right? You've probably all heard that he wants to take up residence in our hearts, right? The Lord is in you, right? But something that really smacked me in the face, right, when I was writing this was just, right, again, the parallel here. I mean, he gave those incredibly detailed instructions to Moses on how to build the tabernacle, all right, the physical sanctuary. Just imagine the detail that went into designing and creating us, all right? I mean, there's half a page here in Exodus, in my Bible, dedicated to building a lampstand. A freaking lampstand, right? Half a page. All of this detail that's going into building a lampstand. So don't ever think that God doesn't know you intimately, right? Because if he cares that much about a lampstand, imagine how much effort he put into designing and building you, right? Inside and out. And if you ever think that you're, worthless, know that lampstand was made of pure gold, right? And if he wanted a golden lampstand in a temporary place, that he couldn't wait to get out of, right? He couldn't be contained in this spot. He couldn't wait to get out of it so he could take up residence in our hearts. What does that tell you about what he thinks of us as his creations? I, as someone who's dealt with like a lifelong struggle with like self-esteem, you may or may not know that, but I do overcompensate with it with kind of obnoxious arrogance. I don't know if that ever comes off a little bit, but that was my original way of trying to deal with it, because I've been in that place where I've literally asked the question without an answer: if I died tomorrow, would anybody care? Right? I've been in that place. Okay, like I've been in the place where I'm saying, what am I good at? Why am I here? Right? This was way before I was saved, way before I even considered, right, Christ as the answer. Right? I've been in that place, and I tried a lot of different ways to get out of it. But I was literally sitting here reading this, and like I shared, I literally it came all out of me while I was writing it, while I was typing it and everything like that. But after I was done and I wrote that little part right there, I stopped and I looked at the screen and I literally had tears. And I sat there, and it was like 11 o'clock at night. My wife had already gone to bed, and I just sat down there and I was just like, wow, we talk about God loves us, Jesus wants to be with us. He wants to have a personal relationship with us. But this right here, that all became like, and I knew that, right? But that really became real to me, right? Really, when I wrote about that, because he is the creator, and he created us. And they say he created us for a purpose, right? He created us to live within us. And he truly cares about that it's amazing to me how everything kind of works together, and all the things that you hear about, when you talk, all the Christianese and everything like that. Like, he wants to dwell within our hearts, and it's so good. It's so good, and I've been on a high all the week, because I've just been thinking about, how much that God truly loves us and cares about every little thing that we want to do, because he lives within us.
I think that's the most. A lot of people say, "Oh, you're so radical." And it's like, well, why am I radical? It's like they're like, it's not because of what we believe, and I don't think that's necessarily because like how we act, but the most radical thing is that we have a living relationship with like the God of the universe, like living inside of us, like guiding us and helping us love other people right and get through this life, and that is so cool. That is the definition of like radical.
And it changes.
Amazing word I can think of.
It has to, So I just ask that, again, this I really like this verse here in Revelations. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. Right. So if you hear his voice and you hear him knocking, let him in, because that's where he wants to be. That's where he wants to be. He cannot wait to get in there.